Hello and welcome to this screencast on comparing areas and perspectives. So we're looking at similarities and differences between areas and perspectives here. We've already looked at using research methods to do that. You know, how do research methods differ between different areas and different debates, different perspectives, I should say. And what I'm going to do on this one here is to look at another way in which you can compare areas and perspectives with each other, and that is using the free will versus determinism debate. What I want to do first of all is to just make sure that you are happy with the determinism free will debate, because it is one that students, for whatever reason, do struggle with a little bit. I think they kind of understand it to start off with, and then when they apply it to particular situations in psychology, then they start having a bit of a problem with it. So let's do that first of all then. So this is the definition at the top here. So these are the two positions, I guess, of the debate. So if you're looking at a deterministic explanation of behaviour, then what you're saying is it proposes that all behaviour has a cause and is thus predictable. Okay, so we're essentially saying that the way that you behave is not down to your choices, it's not down to your free will, it's down to forces beyond your control, whether they be internal or external. Okay, so if we're talking about a highly nurture type of explanation, so it's your behavior is down to the environment that you grew up in, that is deterministic. Okay, just in the same way as your personality being the way it is and you have no control over that, means that that is also a deterministic explanation, because you're saying, well, it's down to my personality over which I have no control, etc., or genetics. Anything like that is a deterministic explanation. And you'll find that the vast majority of explanations within psychology have a deterministic slant in that even if you're talking about a degree of free will, it's only small, really. The vast majority of psychology is deterministic, as is science in general. Now, I am aware that my head is over part of this, but as I'll move through this, hopefully you'll see the whole of this slide. Okay, so just finishing that explanation there. So free will is an illusion, and our behaviour is governed by internal and external forces over which we have no control. And obviously the opposite of that is the idea that we are able to make choices about our behaviour. As I say, there aren't really any of our main areas and perspectives that kind of take that particular idea anyway forward. The humanistic explanation, the humanistic area, does a great deal more of that, but that's for next year. Okay, let's have a look at the areas then, and we'll just look at what we mean and how these how free will determinism actually relates to these particular areas. So if we start off with cognitive, so in the cognitive explanation, the cognitive area of behaviour, then we do have a degree of free will associated here, because we're talking about the fact that we have these things called mediating processes. So mediating processes are basically talking about cognitive processes, thinking processes that are involved in making decisions about behaviour. So what it's essentially saying is that in some cases, the choice of your behaviour is partly down to you, or you certainly have the illusion that you have some sort of choice. So you might be talking about things like, let's think about a nice little example of that. Arvin on the train. Now, I know Arvin is in the social area, but there was a big crossover with the cognitive area here as well. He talked about something called a cost-reward analysis in terms of whether people help or not. Okay, and that cost-reward analysis is a cognitive process whereby people say, right, okay, balancing this up, should I help or not? If you think about that, that has a degree of free will associated with it, doesn't it? Okay, because certain people did help, other people didn't, and what they said is because they made a cost-reward analysis. At the same point, though, there were other factors associated with why people helped or didn't, such as how close the victim was to the unexpected event and that sort of thing. Now, I know I'm going on about Arvin here, which belongs to the social area, but you can see how there's a big crossover. Just in the same way as we just said there, obviously there is a large degree of determinism within the cognitive area. Okay. However, if we kind of add it all up, and see it as a whole area, we would talk about the cognitive area as being a soft deterministic explanation of behaviour, i.e. it does kind of involve some degree of free will, only a small amount, but a small amount at least. Okay, hope that helps. So it kind of one of those ones that kind of falls in the middle. There's a bit of both going on. Let's have a look at the social area then. Okay, so in the social area, we can talk about a degree of free will associated with behaviour here as well, because of the fact that some people seem to be unaffected by the presence of others or choose not to help. And again, this could be on a cost-reward analysis, coming back to Piliaven. So if you consider obedience in the Milgram study, there was a whole 35% of people who didn't go right to the top of the scale. They did go a long way, but they didn't go the full way. And that 35% of people were not affected seemingly by the situation, or if they were, chose to do something different. Okay, so there's a degree of free will there, isn't there? If you remember, the social area tends to favour situational explanations for behaviour. It tends to take out the whole sort of concept of the individual. Not completely, obviously, because we've mentioned it here, but there is a tendency to look at the situational explanation. The situational explanations are, by their very status, they are reductionist, okay, and they are also deterministic. They're saying that there is no free will involved. It is down to the situation, how you behave. Okay, hopefully that helps that. Three that are probably a little bit more simple now. The biological area. Well, the biological area is highly deterministic. Okay, so there's a term in the biological area called biology is destiny. So in other words, the structures of your brain, your genetics, your particular neurochemistry, whatever you want to, whatever your biology happens to be in terms of that, hormones, etc., nervous system, then that determines your behaviour. There's no truck for free will in the biological area. There's an example of biological determinism. It's a type of hard determinism. Okay, moving on. We can also say that the developmental area tends to have a quite a deterministic explanation of behaviour as well. Because what it tends to do is it tends to rely on nurture explanations. Okay, so they're not talking about nature as such here. If it was a combination of nature and nurture, then you would get a little bit more free will involved, wouldn't you, potentially? However, because these are nurture explanations, then the individual explanations, such as people's personality, tends to get ignored. And as such, you have quite a deterministic explanation of behaviour. Again, if it's looking at nurture, then only then that's reductionist also. You see how those two kind of combine together very often. Okay, individual differences. So I'll probably just be best moving this up slightly here. Oops, a bit too much. Here we go. There you go. You can see that a little bit better now, hopefully. Individual differences. So we have individual explanations are preferred to explain behaviour. So this is kind of the opposite, really, I suppose, of the developmental area, in that we're really looking at the individual and the way that individuals differ from one person to another to explain their behaviour. Again, if you think about it, even though that seems to be amazing, you know, we're actually looking at individual differences here rather than trying to blanket everyone in the same explanation of behaviour. Actually, we've ended up being highly deterministic again, haven't we? Because we're saying that the behaviour of people is down to them. Okay, it's not it's kind of like a nature explanation, I suppose, individual nature. Okay, and then we go on to the behaviourist perspective. The behaviourist perspective is probably of everything the most deterministic of all. Okay, we call this hard environmental determinism. All behaviour is learned. Okay, so if you remember the maxim of the behaviourist area is we are born tabula rasa, a blank slate, on which our experience is written. And as such, you know, all behaviour is learned. Okay, there's no room for any individual free will in the behaviourist area. And the last one, the psychodynamic perspective, always one to throw a cat amongst the pigeons, this one, isn't it? So on one side, you could imagine the psychodynamic perspective as being highly deterministic, because your behavior is due to unconscious processes over which you have no real control, if you think, especially if they're unconscious, you don't even know they're there, do you? However, you could make an argument that there is a degree of free will here as well, because Freud did say that through the process of psychoanalysis, we can change our behavior due to the insight that we get about these conflicts between our id ego and superego. And as such, there's a degree of free will there. Okay. Hopefully all of that helps. I'll just put that table up in its fullness. Sorry about my big head in the way, but there we go. It isn't too bad there. Okay. Do have a look at that. Make sure you're happy with it. Replay this video as often as you want to. Hopefully you can see how those areas compare to each other. So if you imagine you'd asked a question on differences between the individual differences area and the cognitive area, or a comparison, you can have a little look at this and see how they actually compare to each other. Okay.